Hello, friends. Welcome to the What is Truth Podcast. Hope everyone is doing fine and exquisite. Today should be a somewhat of a short show. I just want to do some book recommendations and book reviews. If this is your first time to the channel, I am a Lincoln Assassination researcher. If you've been following me for a while, you already know that. But I sometimes get asked what books I would recommend. Even the James Corbett asked me, which was a huge honor. And I labeled myself a Lincoln Assassination researcher after reading several books on the matter. I've stated before that I don't like to do things half-ass. Now, if you are new to my channel, I do cover a plethora of different things. And a huge inspiration to my way of looking at what we call and perceive as reality is the great David McGowan. His website is the Center for Uninformed America.com. Little wordplay there by the late great David McGowan for CIA. And if you go to his website, it is currently run by his daughter. And he has tons and tons of blogs. And it was through my research on the Boston Marathon bombing that I came across for the first time on Mr. McGowan's work. And I loved his style. And I saw he had a Abraham Lincoln book. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about the Abraham Lincoln assassination. Let's look into it. I started reading it. I was at the beach one weekend and I opened up the website on my phone and I'm just reading it on my phone. And I'm like, whoa, the amount of coincidences right off the bat were hitting me. I was like, whoa, I never knew how deep and complex the Lincoln assassination was. And I was so captivated that I ended up reading this book and making it into an audiobook. And I put it on my podcast player. Let's see. If you go to my Odyssey channel, some of you have never heard of Odyssey, and that's fine. But my Odyssey has the vast majority of my videos. I think I have well in excess of 300 videos at this point. And I do long shows. So it would take, if you were to sit there and try to go through all my content, it would take you a long, super long time to get through. And crazily enough, I do know of at least one person, maybe there's a couple of others that I don't know about, that have caught every second of every minute that I have put out. But if you go to my Odyssey channel, make sure you follow me there if you enjoy my content. But if you are not familiar with Odyssey, I want to show a couple things. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because I have been kicked off of YouTube 3 times. I recently got deplatformed on Rockfin. I'm on Rumble right now, but I have no faith that I will be there long term. Right now, I'm putting everything up there, and I haven't had any issues, but I have zero faith I will be there on the long term. So if you enjoy my content, please go to Odyssey. The cool thing about Odyssey is that if you go to the content tab, as you see on the screen, there's a little search tab right here. And let's say you put in David McGowan, and everything that I have done as far as David McGowan material comes up, or I have Dave Chappelle. So if you put in some keywords, it'll come up. So as I put David in there, my Lincoln audiobook comes up, which you can find on my podcast player. So if you follow me on Spotify, Apple iTunes, you should be able to find the audiobook. It is, if you are listening in audio format. The episode for the audiobook is squeezed in between episode 170 and 169. So if you scroll down, this audiobook is squeezed in there. It's not an episode that I numbered, so it's squeezed in there. That's a question that I sometimes get as well. So that's the cool thing about Odyssey. Now, if you go to the playlist tab, I put a couple of playlists together to make it easy for y'all. I have a Lincoln Assassination playlist. And as you can see here, Lincoln related material comes up. I did a part 1 and a part 2 on Forbidden Knowledge News Network with Chris Matthew. I went super deep in it. So if just go off of the date and listen to the one I recorded first, and then listen to the second part. You could do that. I've done a show with author Don Jeffries on the Lincoln Assassination, and we discussed it in somewhat detail. And it wasn't really a debate, but I put my research up against his research, and it was a friendly back and forth. We saw eye to eye on some things, and other things we didn't. I did the same thing with author James Perloff right here. And that is podcast 217 with James Perloff, and that is podcast 224 with author Don Jeffries. I was recently interviewed by a gentleman that just started podcasting, and I uploaded it to my player because I went pretty deep in there with my own thoughts, my views. So, and here is the one that got it all for me, was the audiobook, Why Everything You Think You Know About the Abraham Lincoln Assassination Is Wrong, by David McGowan. I voiced it over. And keep in mind, I pronounced the names wrong. There's a couple of errors that I hope at some point I can go back and fix. But you will get a good gist of it. And so there you have it. My Odyssey, definitely follow me there if you like my content. And if you are new to the channel, I cover a bunch of different topics. I'm not just into the Lincoln, although that is my bread and butter these days. I do stuff on the moon landings, as I touched on. Let's see if I can go back there. Here's my moon landing playlist. David McGowan, here's another audiobook. I did not voice this one over, but it's David McGowan Wagging the Moon Doggy, which is on my podcast player platforms as well as an Odyssey. And David did a great job in debunking the so-called moon landings. I've interviewed Bart Sabrell. I do every 6 weeks. I do a show with the Apollo detectives, who are engineers and scientists who debunk the moon landings. So you can catch those shows live. We take Q&As. But sorry about this little long-winded thing, but just wanted to let you know, if you haven't followed me on Odyssey, please do. If I get taken down anywhere else, that is more than likely the place that I will still be standing. Weezy's Last Stand. So if you follow me on some of these podcast players or Rumble, for example, and 1 week goes by, 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, and I haven't posted anything there, you may want to look and see if my channel's been removed and I've been terminated. I've been terminated many times already. So this is why I apologize, but this is why I'm stressing. If you enjoy my content, just go to Odyssey. That is 100% free speech. And they have come to bat for me when the same sons of bitches that canceled me off of YouTube came after me on Odyssey. Odyssey told them to go pound sand. And for that, I am always grateful to Odyssey for being that free speech platform. So, all right, let's get into it. So the first book that got me was David McGowan's audiobook. I've listened to myself read me that book at least 10 times. I've almost got it memorized. It's freaking bananas. Um, and so that reading his book that many times or listening to it that many times started making me like, damn, I want to know more. I want to know more. My critique on that book, everything that McGowan wrote about, great. There's one part, and we all make mistakes. That doesn't mean you have to scrap out everyone else's um, or the rest of their body of work. But one of the mistakes McGowan makes is when he talking about the Seward attack, he mentions George Robinson, the nurse that was watching over the Seward home. Several times in the book, he mentions that he's a black servant, a black nurse, along with Houseboy Bell, two black folks living at the Seward Mansion during this alleged attack. And when I went to verify it, George Robinson is a white guy. Nothing major. And like I said, and this is the way I go about things. I love David McGowan. He is my inspiration to the way I perceive the world around me. But even then, I verified what he wrote, and that didn't check out. But pretty much everything else, right on the money. And that's not even a big thing. But it, when I found that out, like, whoa, how the hell did the great McGowan miss this one? But again, everyone makes mistakes. We're all humans. I'm sure I've made a million mistakes, and so that's just part of human nature. But that one, in my opinion, as a Lincoln assassination researcher, is the gold standard. That is, yeah. After reading all these other books, I've read some great books too, and we're gonna go about it right now. But the gold standard, by far and large, for me, anyways, is David McGowan's book because he uses common sense, and a lot of the things he posits in that book, I roll with it. I'm backing it up. And David McGowan passed away in 2015. So it's been 10 years since his passing. And I have been able, through his inspiration, formulate new takes. Takes relating to the Trump assassination, for example. Takes relating to Jeff Epstein, which happened after his death. So I've been able to formulate my own style, but I always make it a point to give David McGowan his props. A lot of these books that I ended up reading in David McGowan's book, he puts a list of recommended books, some of the more trusted ones. And so because I cherish and value his work and his wisdom, I took him up on some of these books, and I'm gonna go over some of them today. But there were others that I found on my own, and I found great. So this is probably the one right here that gets every Lincoln assassination researcher down the rabbit hole right here. I have not completed it. I will complete it at some point. I'm about a third of the way through with it. And this book is called Why Was Lincoln Murdered by Otto Eisenschimmel. He wrote it back in 1937. I have not completed it, so I'm not going to go too into detail with it right now. But from many of the authors that I've read about or even spoken, like with Mr. Perloff and Mr. Jeffries and McGowan, David McGowan definitely recommends this book right here. So this one is definitely one to, if you would like to start. I suppose if you are just getting into the Lincoln rabbit hole, a great one for beginners is this one. The let's see, exploding the official myths of the Lincoln assassination by James Perloff. As I stated before, I did a podcast, a show with James Perloff regarding this book. This one, the thing even though I didn't agree with a lot of his conclusions, it's definitely a book for those that are just starting. He makes it easy. He gives you the official story, breaks it down in easy to put terms. So, uh, the official exploding myths. Now, I would consider myself advanced at this point, and so my critique on it, if I may, would be that, and it's not a hard critique. It's just I'm probably a little too far ahead for something like this. Um, so if you are a beginner, for sure, that is one that I would recommend. Uh, Now this one right here, this one was not recommended by David McGowan. This is one that I found out. And lo and behold, Mr. Perloff talks about it as well. So this is a book called The Reason Lincoln Had to Die by Don Thomas. Don Thomas does a superb job. This book is very highly detailed. It is, let's see how many pages. It's about 160 pages long, and he has a shit ton of footnotes. This guy's research is the tits. He currently is alive. I tried reaching out to him, wanted him to discuss the book, and unfortunately, when I reached out to him, he said he would. At that point in time, maybe I should try again at some point. But at that point in time, he wasn't doing any shows. He was just chilling. So, and he was respectful. He did it very respectably. It wasn't rude or anything like that. So, as I said, uh, this one by Don Thomas is a great one. He focuses on this book on the John Wilkes Booth diary. So, the majority of what this book goes on is the John Wilkes Booth diary, which allegedly was on John Wilkes Booth's body and corpse at when he was allegedly killed at Garrett's barn. The book was recovered by Lafayette Baker, and it was turned over to Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton kept it for 2 years. And it wasn't until Lafayette Baker wrote a book called The History of the Secret Service that the public first got wind about a John Wilkes Booth diary. Everyone at the time was like, what the hell? How come we didn't know about this? And so Stanton had to fess up. Oh, yeah. Sorry, guys. I forgot. It's right here. He kept it for 2 years. FBI analysis in the 70s regarding the Booth diary found tons and tons and tons of shenanigans, such as pages missing, pages ripped off and restitched. So many shenanigans were there. One of the damning things in the Booth diary, allegedly, is that Booth at one point says that and this is when he's on the run, and and the feds are after him on the chase. He says in one of the pages that he plans on going back to Washington, D.C. to clear his name. And if that's true, that's huge, because what does that tell you? He feels so confident that he plans on going back to DC and clearing his damn name. However, my personal take, and this is where I disagree with Tom. So as I'm disagreeing with Mr. Don Thomas's book here, it's not that I'm shitting on it. I recommend it. So let's be clear. His research is the fucking tits. Excuse my language. That's just how I talk. But his detail, like I showed you, he has shit tons of footnotes from primary source documents and whatnot. The My biggest issue with this book is he puts a lot of faith into the Booth Diary. From my perspective, I look at the Booth Diary as, all right, the FBI has already admitted that there were tons and tons of shenanigans with the book. Pages ripped and torn and glued back together and stitched up. So why the hell should we just take at their word that everything else is fine and okay? How do we not know the stuff that was added was to change the story around or confirm this part of their fairy tale? You see what I'm saying? So it's not a knock on Mr. Don Thomas. This is why I have it here. I'm recommending it. If you are a Lincoln nerd like myself, Don Thomas's The Reason Lincoln Had to Die is definitely a great read. I'm only simply saying, from my point of view, my biggest disagreement with that book is that he puts a lot of faith, too much faith, if you ask me, in the Booth Diary, which I have many, many questions about. But again, it's not a knock. The book that I just finished reading is this one, John Wilkes Booth, Beyond the Grave by W.C. Jameson. I was supposed to have Mr. W.C. Jameson on the show. Unfortunately, health problems came about and we couldn't do it. I did email him not too long ago, not to bug him anymore, only to tell him that I have him in my thoughts and I genuinely hope he's doing okay. But this is Mr. W.C. Jameson. This was a book recommended by the late great David McGowan. Although at the time David McGowan recommended this book, the book was called Return of the Assassin. When I was getting ready to do a show with Mr. Jameson, he advised me to get this version of it. This was updated. Some things had to be changed, some publishing things, blah, blah, blah. So this was the updated version of it. John Wilkes Booth, Beyond the Grave. Pretty, and that's the thing, the more I read a lot of these books, a lot of the same, you start to feel like it's getting monotonous, where, all right, I already heard this shit. Give me some juicy stuff. This is the level that I'm at this point in time in the research. You know, when you're first starting something, you see one thing and you're like, whoa, wow. You know, the first time you read a story, second time you still may be captivated, but after it's been over and over and over again, it gets monotonous. And so this one, it's not a knock either. I mean, if you're not too far deep into the book, this is a good book. I do have a couple of critiques on it though. There were a couple of things that were based on some of the other information that I've come across and read. It's not how do I put this? They weren't completely accurate. And so now that I'm super, super deep in this, whenever I come up against some inaccuracies or inaccuracies that get passed off as complete fact, it does kind of get at me. And it's not just this book. I've read a bunch of official narratives stuff. I've listened to a bunch of these so-called experts and lecturers talking about the story, and they're wearing their little fucking suit and ties and their little fucking spectacles, spewing complete shit. And I'm listening to these clowns and I'm like, that's fucking wrong. And the people in the audience are like, oh wow, that's awesome. It's complete horseshit. And so I still enjoyed this book, and I'm going to tell you why. Why I'm still recommending it. But that's my critique on it. There were a couple of inconsistencies that were wrong. However, there were also bits in here that I had never heard anywhere else. Some of these bits, because of the other inconsistencies, I have been trying to verify. I still haven't been able to verify them completely. But if I do, holy shit, man. One of those, let me give you a couple of the big things in this book. One of those is Lewis Payne Powell. The claim was in this book. And even Don Thomas kind of hints at it, but he doesn't go in it. And the thing is, with all these books, the attack on the Seward Mansion, everyone believes it actually physically happened. David McGowan makes the assertion that based on the evidence, available evidence, the primary source documents, it's all a fabricated lie. I don't want to get too much into it. Or that, go to my Lincoln Assassination playlist. I did a show with Ergo, a listener, where we went super deep on the Seward Mansion. My conversation with Don Jeffries, I went super deep. I even, from my point of view, author Don Jeffries called me the first Henry Rathbone conspiracy theorist. McGowan doesn't straight up say that Rathbone is the one that shot Lincoln, although when you've read his book as many times as I have over, you are left to conclude that Rathbone is probably the likely one to pull the trigger in the presidential box at Ford's Theater. And that, even though he never outright says it, David McGowan does, I have now been saying it. My theory involves that Wilkes Booth did not pull the trigger at Ford's Theater. It had to be Henry Rathbone. And real quick, because if you are just listening to me for the first time, you're probably like, what the fuck, you lost me. Let me state my case. I think it's a very compelling case. Henry Rathbone was, so in the presidential box at Ford's Theater, there was a Henry Rathbone, his stepsister fiance, Clara Harris, Mary Todd Lincoln, and of course, Abraham Lincoln. It was all four of them. You'll have other statements of another gentleman being in the box, but he says that decades after the matter. So if you pay attention to Henry Rathbone's deposition, never once does he mention that other gentleman. In the deposition for Henry Rathbone that was given at trial, physical evidence, he states those were the only occupants in that box. So in that box, those people were the only witnesses, and the only one that ever gave any deposition was Henry Rathbone. It's super odd that Mary Todd Lincoln wasn't asked to give a deposition. It's super odd that fiance, stepsister, Clara Harris wasn't asked to give a deposition. Super freaking strange. Now let's take this a little bit further. When you study Henry Rathbone's depositions, he gave two in 1865, and he gave another one in 1867 during the John Surratt Jr. trial. When you examine all three depositions, the only change is that the first deposition was given in the third person. The second and third deposition were given in the first person. Think about that for 1 second. If this is the first time you are hearing this, one must conclude that it was a memorized script. And this is something that David McGowan hammers home because no other historian ever talks about it, ever mentions it. So the people that believe the official story that Wilkes Booth pulled the trigger, when you bring this up, why was he reciting a memorized script? They're like, what? A lot of them don't even know this. So they've already put in their mind that John Wilkes Booth was the one that pulled the trigger, but they don't even know that this this huge thing in as far as Rathbone repeating the same memorized script on no less than 3 occasions. That is massive. That should produce reasonable doubt. Who in the hell, as they're giving a deposition, repeat something that they memorized? Doesn't take a lot of it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see the absurdity in that. And because a lot of people that may be believing in the Wilkes Booth pulling the trigger camp, it's not that they're stupid. Maybe they just don't even know that little tidbit. But at the same time, if you don't know that, but you're espousing that your position is correct, and then when I say my position and you start laughing me off, who is really the ridiculous one for thinking this? You see what I'm saying? So I'm making my assertion based on the evidence presented. The other thing about Henry Rathbone that a lot of historians, mainline historians especially, rarely mention. You'll hear it mentioned every now and then, but then they have answers or they try to finesse it a certain way. Is that in the official story, Booth pulls the trigger on Lincoln. According to Rathbone, in his memorized script, says that as soon as Wilkes Booth pulls the trigger on Lincoln, he yells, "Freedom!" Then, with his left hand, he had a Bowie knife, so he comes in. So, this is where the story gets ridiculous for me, and why I believe Henry Rathbone did not pull it, or Henry Rathbone is probably the one that pulled the trigger and not John Wilkes Booth, because we are told that the occupants were in that box at Ford's Theater. We are told that as they are sitting in the box, Wilkes Booth goes up into the box, and conveniently, John F. Parker was supposed to be guarding the entrance to that box, but coincidentally, he's out drunk. He's out drunk and having relations with women of the street. And this officer was specially handpicked by Mary Todd Lincoln. That's another little fact that a lot of people have a hard time. It's a tough pill to swallow for people that follow along the official story there. And the funny thing is, Otto Eisenschimmel produces a letterhead of let me see if I can find it here. Anyways, he produces the stationery of Mary Todd Lincoln, specifically asking for John F. Parker. So, anyways, John Wilkes Booth makes his way to the box. He's holding, we are told, a one-shot Derringer and a Bowie knife. He opens the door. No one in that box hears him coming in. We are told, and even Henry Rathbone in his deposition, he says that when they try to let people in to give access to Lincoln, so they could provide medical aid, that the door was wedged shut by a piece of plank. And it was wedged so hard that it took considerable strength. These aren't my words. These are Henry Rathbone's words in his memorized script. So if we take that into account, that means Booth comes in with his gun and knife. If he's going to put a plank and wedge it tight, you have to assume he has to put the little weapons in his pocket and grab that plank wherever the hell it came from, and it fit perfectly on the door. This inconsistency is one that historians try to say, oh, well, Booth came in earlier in the day and bore a hole through the door and cut the plank down. It's bullshit to try to make the official story fit in line. The plan to assassinate Lincoln only came about earlier that goddamn day. That's what all the sources seem to agree on. That Booth originally planned to kidnap Lincoln, but on that Friday, he's like, fuck it, I'm going to kill him. That's what we are told, anyways. This is the official story narrative. So if he decided on Friday, do you really think, okay, now I'm going to go bore a hole on this door. Now I'm going to cut a piece of plank and I'm going to stash it right here. It is baloney. This is why I don't believe the official story on Wilkes Booth pulling the trigger. So you have to imagine he comes in and wedges the door, and no one at any point hears any rustling. Henry Rathbone says the door was closed the entire time. So no one noticed the door opening and then closing. The whole story is nonsense. I will be going to Ford's Theater and visiting there, and I will be taking video. I will be recording, and I'll do another video on my thoughts once I'm there at the actual site. But the interesting thing about Henry Rathbone is, so after Booth allegedly pulls a trigger, he then lunges at Henry Rathbone. Rathbone strikes up the slashing with his left arm and receives a cut a few inches above the elbow and below the shoulder. And he says that all three times in all three depositions. And he says that it was a great wound. He was bleeding profusely, but apparently never got medical attention, just went home and slept it off. Lincoln, or Mary Todd Lincoln, and Clara Harris were both sitting down the entire time, did not scream. So after Booth slashes Rathbone, gets up on the baluster, jumps down, raises the Bowie knife. No witnesses saw any blood on the knife, just like there was no blood on Trump's hand after the fight. And later he says it was covered with blood, blah, blah, blah. But after he does that, he says the South will be avenged, Sixth Emperor Tyrannus. Allegedly, he breaks his leg right there, depending on what source. There's a bunch of versions of that as well. And he hauls ass. After he hauls ass, that's when Henry Rathbone says, "Stop that, man!" And after Henry Rathbone yells that, that's when Mary Todd Lincoln decides to scream bloody murder, and Clara Harris stays quiet the whole time. That is some of the most preposterous set of events and circumstances for the official story that official historians or mainline historians will tell you this with a straight eye. not have any issues with how preposterous the whole fucking story is. And another curious fact, and which leads credence to why I view Mr. Rathbone as a suspect, is that Henry Rathbone will then go off to marry his fiance's stepsister. And now it's his stepsister wife. And they go over to Europe. And a few years later, he ends up cutting himself up, killing his stepsister wife. When the authorities show up, he claims that he was attacked and they killed his stepsister wife. Authorities don't buy it and they throw him in the insane asylum. So what does that tell you? It tells you that Henry Rathbone shows a precedent to being able to cut up himself and lie about it, and try to lie anyways about it. And mainline historians will say, well, you know, Henry Rathbone saw Lincoln getting shot and he probably felt guilty. This is all speculation. He felt guilty. He had PTSD. And that's why he ended up doing what he did and slashing himself and killing his stepsister wife. These are the type of mental gymnastics people that parrot the official story have to perform. I try to avoid all that shit. Just give me the straight dope. And so, just to wrap things up on the events at Ford's Theater, another issue is Mary Todd Lincoln not doing anything. Mary Todd Lincoln specifically asking for John F. Parker to be guarding. John F. Parker, the guy that was supposed to be sitting outside the hall into the box, was the most demerited cop in the force. He had been constantly written up for foul and insolent language, for being a scumbag, the most demerited cop in the force. And this is the one that Mary Todd Lincoln ends up choosing, specifically choosing this son of a bitch. So she's a suspect. Now, in this book, Mr. W.C. Jameson talks about Mary Todd Lincoln having extramarital affairs. One of those alleged well-known secret affairs was with the White House gardener. And so when I came across that on this book, I was like, "Ooh, that lends credence to where I'm going with my mind as to what may or may not have happened at Ford's Theater on the night of April 14th, 1865. And so another thing is Lincoln, there's no hard evidence, excuse the pun, that Lincoln was a homosexual, but the circumstantial evidence is not far off. There's a gentleman by the name of Joshua Fry Speed, who was his good friend, apparently, when Mr. Speed ended up moving away from Lincoln, Lincoln was so sad and distraught that he postponed his freaking marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln. He was so sad and depressed. He also would share beds with Joshua Fry Speed. And people that get mad and angry over if Lincoln was a gay guy or not, they'll get pissed off. They'll get angry. And I have no agenda in this. I don't care if he was gay or not. I don't give a fuck what people do behind closed doors. But in terms of my theory, that would certainly, most certainly fit with my theory. That would make sense. That would explain why Mary Todd Lincoln didn't really give a shit when Lincoln was killed. She was later then put in the loony bin by their scummy ass son, Robert Todd Lincoln. But sorry, a little bit long winded there. I'm pretty much done with the books I want to review for tonight. I'm going to do another video down at some point. Also, if you are listening to this on Spotify or Odyssey, Rumble, wherever, if you have some books, if you've been listening to my Lincoln uh, podcast and shows, and you have gone down the Lincoln trail, and maybe there's something you would like to share with me, send me an email. If you want to get on the show and you and I could have a discussion on it, I'm open to that. Get in touch with me. I would love that. Uh, I'm the only person that I know about that has these what would be considered super out there views and thoughts on the whole Lincoln fiasco, on the Seward Mansion attacks, and so on and so forth. So if you feel you could jive with me, maybe you think I've got shit wrong, and you want to have a friendly discussion, a friendly back and forth. Let's do it too. I'm open to it all. I want to believe in as many true things as possible. So if I need to be stand corrected on certain things, I'm open to that. So I'm not married to my views. A lot of these views that I've made, though, and inferences, is because I've I've really, really gone down this rabbit hole. So the other crazy thing about the W.C. Jameson book that really blew my mind was talk about Lewis Payne Powell and or having body doubles. Mr. Jameson says that Lewis Payne Powell had a cousin that looked exactly like him, but one of them went through by the name of Lewis Payne, the other one went by the name of Lewis Powell, and the case for those two being two separate individuals is pretty strong. Now, Lewis Powell is the one that's credited. He's the young 20-year-old that looks like a Calvin Klein supermodel. Let me see if I can pull him up real quick. But he when you hear the reports, and this is absolutely true, as I've read the books, you'll hear some sources say that Lewis Powell was let me share screen here, that Lewis Powell, and here we go. I made this little meme. It's a colorized photo of Lewis Payne Powell, the Reverend Kitchelow, Mosby, Lewis Thornton Powell. He had so many aliases. And look at that picture. Not a single scratch, not a single bruise. But we are told, and if you listen to a lot of these official mainline historians, they always talk about how this one guy overpowered everyone at the Seward Mansion. Not a single shot was fired. He destroys everyone. And as you can see there, not a single scratch to be found. So when you read the sources, some sources will say Lewis Powell was just a brute, an idiot, stone cold killer, the muscle man. He, and they make him sound like he's some kind of super villain that just goes in there and just fucks everyone up at the Seward Mansion house without ever receiving a scratch or a wound. And you'll hear other sources say that apparently he knew Booth. So these other sources that say he was an idiot, they'll say that it's not really clear if Booth and Payne really ever knew each other, and that they were super very different personality types. They didn't have anything in common. But the reason Booth recruited him, allegedly, was because he was a big, strong kid. And other sources say that Lewis Payne was actually very intelligent. And the way he got in touch with or with John Wilkes Booth was um, Lewis Payne being a fan of theater and watching John Wilkes Booth perform. So this other version of Lewis Payne is that of a learned man, a cultured man, which when you look at the story when he runs to the Surratt home after the alleged mansion home and does that bumbling idiot move to go into the house as the feds are raiding it. Like, why would he do that? And if he's a smart guy, there's no way in hell if he would have saw those feds, he'd be like, well, I'm going the other way. So there are inconsistencies where you can see two different humans, a more of a brutish, bumbling idiot, and a more intellectual version of it. And so it's possible that there were two individuals, a Lewis Payne and a Lewis Powell. According to W.C. Jameson, Lewis Powell was the cousin. And it's interesting that he later goes on to become governor of the Wyoming Territory. I still have been trying to verify this. And so if anyone can, again, if you've got information to help me verify this or just shut it down, I welcome it. Email me, put it in the comments, get a hold of me. But that's where I found that information. Super, super interesting information right there. Ooh, and I almost forgot one other thing about the W.C. Jameson book is that he makes the case that John Wilkes Booth was not killed at Garrett's barn. Makes a rather compelling case, and it involves a lookalike in James W. Boyd that was instead killed at Garrett's barn, and Wilkes Booth escapes. And the case he makes for the James William Boyd and John Wilkes Booth body double is compelling. Makes a lot of goddamn sense. And it makes sense why David McGowan leans towards that way of thinking, that Wilkes Booth was never killed at Garrett's barn. And a lot of historians, even conspiratorial historians like Don Thomas and James Perloff and Don Jeffries, they'll even say that he was indeed killed at Garrett's barn. But when you read that book, it's pretty damn good. And apparently Mr. W.C. Jameson is a relative of the Booth clan. So definitely recommend it. So all in all, those are some of the books that I've read. And I would recommend. Now, I listened to the audiobook of James Swanson, Manhunt. It is 100% official narrative. And they even did I think a movie about it or a 2-part series. I can't remember, but it's called Manhunt, the 12-day chase to catch Lincoln's killer. I think it's the full name of the book, but I just put in James Swanson Manhunt. The audiobook was on YouTube. I tried looking for it and listening to it again a second time the other day, and I couldn't find it, so maybe it got taken down. But if you want the official story, Mr. Swanson is considered the premier expert in all things Lincoln related. And I feel pretty damn good in my research that I would love to have a talk with him. That would be fun. I love debates. I've had a few debates on my channel, ranging on a number of different topics. But that James Swanson book is complete shit. But the reason I am recommending it is because if you want to consider yourself a legitimate quote unquote researcher, you have to see what the other side is saying. You have to see and take in information that contradicts your own findings and views. Because you could possibly learn something more or steel man your case even further. And so my biggest problems with James Swanson's book is because he tells the official narrative 100%. He makes Edwin Stanton as a good guy. That Lincoln loved Edwin Stanton. That Secretary of State Seward loved Lincoln. um and these conspiracy theories, people like me are fucking wrong for even questioning Stanton and Thomas Eckert, Lafayette Baker. I'm crazy. And so, but my biggest issue with a work such as James Swanson is how he overly dramatizes the book, man. He puts in certain details in the book and he passes them off as fact. For example, when he's talking about Lewis Powell attacking the Seward residence, and Fanny Seward is upstairs. She's got the light dim. He's just picked up the book, Legends of Charlemagne. How the fuck does he know this shit? This is what I mean. It's overly dramatized. And the thing is, the average person or people that haven't looked into Lincoln that much will read this shit and say this is gospel truth. I've been told James Swanson is the reigning expert. And so this is absolute gospel. And I will not question it. If anyone questions it, I will laugh at them and ridicule them as crazy. And I guess that's what upsets me, you know, these official narrative charlatans, if you will. Yeah. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave in the comments, if you will, any book recommendations, maybe things that you would recommend me looking into, maybe other possible guests that you would like me to reach out to. Or if you can reach out to them, send them my way. Tell them, hey, this guy, you know, you and this guy would have an excellent chat on the Lincoln official story. Yeah, send them my way. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And I will do another book or another video. I'm gonna, for the 160 Lincoln assassination, I will be here at Ford's Theater. This book is only about 100 pages long, and it's mostly pictures, but it's the history of Ford's Theater. At a point in time, it caught fire conveniently, as many of the Lincoln records were also housed there. So who knows how much of that juicy shit got destroyed during this fire. There was also a partial collapse. So this is a good book that I'll be reading just to get the history. So when I go there, I'm well versed. And I will finish reading the Otto Eisenschimmel book as well. Hope you guys enjoyed that. You got any questions or comments, just put them there, and I will try to get to them, and Hope you guys enjoy it. If you have any suggestions, again, any other books or possible guests, let me know. Thank you and much love. Hugs and kisses.